My family kicked me out for being different, but now I'm the only successful one, and they're desperately trying to win me back. You won't believe. Have you ever felt like you just don't fit in? That no matter how hard you try to be yourself, it's just not enough? Well, this story is about how I was kicked out of my family for being different and how, years later, I turned my life around to become the only successful one in the bunch. Stick with me, because this isn't your average I show them all kind of story. It's a tale of rejection, resilience, and a whole lot of self-discovery. Part 1. The family that never understood me. From the outside looking in, my family seemed perfect. Mom, dad, a couple of siblings, all living the picture-perfect suburban life. But behind closed doors, that's where things got complicated. Growing up, I always knew I was different. I wasn't like my older siblings. While they excelled in traditional school subjects, I gravitated toward things that seemed a little out of the ordinary. I had an intense love for video games, programming, and anything tech-related. My parents never seemed to understand it. They'd tell me to stop wasting time and focus on real things, like math, science, and whatever they considered important. There were constant arguments about my future. They couldn't understand why I wasn't into the things they thought were worth pursuing. Things like sports, going to church, or even just being normal. To them, it felt like I was rejecting everything they believed in. It wasn't long before the tension built up to the point where I felt completely alien in my own home. But, of course, I didn't know at the time how deep that feeling would go. I never thought that my passion for things that didn't fit their mold would lead to me being kicked out of the family. But that's exactly what happened. Part 2. The breaking point. The turning point came one evening after a particularly intense argument. I had just spent the entire day building a new computer from scratch, a project that had consumed most of my time for weeks. It wasn't just a hobby. It was my escape, my passion, the one thing that felt right in my life. My parents, however, didn't see it that way. "You've wasted enough time with this nonsense," my dad snapped as he stormed into my room, looking at my half-assembled PC. "You're not going to get anywhere in life with this crap." I tried to explain that I was building something that could potentially be useful, that it was more than just a hobby. It was something that could turn into a career, something that could provide me with a future. But they didn't want to hear it. The words they said cut deep, but it was the disappointment on their faces that really got to me. That night, things escalated. My mom joined in, accusing me of wasting my potential and throwing away my future. I had tried so hard for years to prove that I could still be successful, just in my own way, but they never saw it. They didn't believe in me. I'll never forget the moment when my dad, in a voice full of frustration and anger, told me that I wasn't welcome in their house anymore. "If you want to pursue this ridiculous dream, go find somewhere else to do it." That was it. The door slammed, and I was left standing there, stunned, feeling like my entire world had just shattered in front of me. Part 3. Out on my own. I wish I could say that when I left, I had some grand plan in mind. The truth is, I had no idea what to do. I was 18, barely out of high school, with a handful of skills in tech and a deep sense of rejection from the people who were supposed to support me. I packed my stuff and left that night. The house I had called home for years no longer felt like a safe place. I knew if I stayed, I would just keep fighting with my parents, and that wasn't something I could handle anymore. So I took my laptop, a few clothes, and what little money I had saved up from doing odd jobs and started over. At first, it was terrifying. I moved into a small apartment I could barely afford, eating ramen for every meal and barely scraping by. There were days when I felt completely alone, wondering if I had made the right choice. I missed my family, even though I hated how they treated me. But at the same time, I felt free from their expectations, free from their constant judgment. I spent those first few months in isolation, pouring myself into learning everything I could about coding, web development, and technology. The only thing I knew for sure was that I was determined to prove that being different wasn't a bad thing. It was my strength. I started taking on freelance projects, building websites for small businesses, anything I could find that would help me survive. And slowly, very slowly, I started to make a name for myself in the online tech world. Part 4. The first taste of success. I won't lie, the early days were brutal. There were weeks where I didn't know how I'd make rent. But the thing about hitting rock bottom is that you learn to appreciate the small wins, no matter how insignificant they may seem. One day, after what felt like an eternity of hustle, I landed my first big contract. A local business reached out to me for help with their website, offering a decent sum of money. I was beyond excited. It wasn't much, but it was proof that I could do it. I was building something on my own, without relying on anyone else's approval. That project was my turning point. I poured every ounce of effort into it, double-checked every line of code, and made sure everything was perfect. When the client saw the final result, they were thrilled, and they referred me to others. That one contract snowballed into more work, and soon enough, I was getting steady income. It wasn't instant fame or fortune, but it was real progress. The more I worked, the more I realized that I didn't need validation from my family. What I was doing, the path I was on, was real and legitimate, and it was mine. There was this incredible satisfaction in being able to say, I did this on my own, knowing that I didn't need anyone's permission or approval to succeed. Part 5. The Unexpected Offer. As my business grew, I started connecting with other professionals in the tech industry. I joined online communities, attended virtual meetups, and made a few friends who were doing similar work. It was exciting to be surrounded by people who shared my passion. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was the odd one out. One day, out of the blue, I received a message from a company. They had seen my portfolio online and were interested in offering me a full-time position as a software developer. The pay was more than anything I had imagined earning at that point, and the job was exactly the kind of work I loved, building cutting-edge applications and solving complex problems. The offer felt like a dream. I was being recognized by a respected company, a company that didn't care about my background, my family drama, or the fact that I wasn't the perfect candidate on paper. They cared about my skills, my drive, and my potential, but there was something inside me that hesitated. I had worked so hard to build my freelance business, to prove that I didn't need a traditional career path. I had the freedom to choose my projects, set my own schedule, and work from anywhere. The idea of going back to a 9-to-5 job felt like a step backward, like I was abandoning everything I had worked for. But the offer was tempting. The security it promised was hard to ignore. It wasn't an easy decision, but I decided to take the leap. I accepted the job offer. Part 6. Settling into success. Starting my new job was both exciting and intimidating. It felt surreal to be working at a company that I had admired from afar for so long. I was no longer the lone freelancer in a tiny apartment scraping by. I had a team, a steady paycheck, and resources I never dreamed I'd have access to. The stability felt good. Too good, in fact. But as the days went on, I realized something. While the money and security were nice, I wasn't as fulfilled as I thought I would be. Sure, I was getting paid well, but I was working on projects that didn't light me up the way my freelance work had. The hours were long, the expectations high, and I found myself missing the freedom I once had. At the same time, though, something unexpected started to happen. The more experience I gained, the more my reputation grew. My colleagues started to respect my opinions, and I was trusted with bigger and more challenging projects. I was developing skills that I couldn't have learned on my own. But there was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Was this really the life I wanted? The corporate grind, the meetings, the deadlines. It was a far cry from the freedom I'd experienced when I was building my business. It was clear that something had to change, but I wasn't sure what. Then, one day I had a conversation with a friend from one of my online communities, a fellow tech entrepreneur who had built a successful startup. They told me something that stuck with me. You can have both. You can keep your stability and pursue your passions. You just have to get smart about it. Part 7. The side hustle begins. That conversation with my friend was a wake-up call. Up until that point, I had convinced myself that I could either be a corporate employee or a freelancer, but never both. I thought I had to choose one path and commit fully to it. But after hearing my friend's words, I realized there was another way. I could have the best of both worlds. So, I started working on a side project during my free time. I began developing a tech product that I'd had in mind for a while, a software tool that could help small business owners streamline their operations. It was something I was passionate about, and it felt like the perfect combination of my skills and interests. I didn't jump in blindly. I still kept my full-time job, using the stability it offered to fund my side hustle. Every evening after work and on weekends, I would dive into coding, designing, and researching. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I was exhausted, but I pushed through because I believed in this project. The more I worked on it, the more I started to see the potential. It wasn't just another hobby or pet project. This could be the thing that really changed my life. Again. Slowly but surely, I began to build a user base. I started marketing my product through social media and word of mouth, and people actually began paying for it. Every new customer felt like a small victory. But there was something else happening during this time that I wasn't prepared for. I started to distance myself from my family. Part 8. The distance grows. As my side hustle grew, so did the distance between me and my family. At first, I tried to keep in touch with them. I'd send messages or call my mom every few weeks, telling her how things were going with work and the project I was building. But every conversation seemed to turn into a reminder of how different I was from the rest of them. I remember one call with my mom where she asked, "How's your little project going?" in that dismissive tone that used to drive me crazy. I told her things were going well and that I was getting real customers. Instead of being proud, she seemed confused. "You really think that's going to work out?" she asked. "You know, it's better to just get a good job and stop messing around with this tech stuff." It stung, but I didn't let it show. I tried to explain how the tech industry was changing, how this could be my future. But it felt like she didn't even care to listen. It was clear that they still saw me as the lost cause they had kicked out of their house years ago. And it wasn't just my mom. Whenever I saw my siblings, it was the same story. They had their own lives, jobs, families, and routines, and I was just that weird tech guy who didn't fit in with their idea of success. They couldn't understand why I was choosing this unconventional path. And honestly, I didn't feel like explaining it anymore. So the calls and visits became less frequent. I started to build my own life, a life that had nothing to do with their expectations. I couldn't keep pretending like I was the person they wanted me to be. And yet, there was this lingering feeling that I was losing something important, my connection to my family. Part 9. The tipping point. Things were going well in my professional life. My side hustle was growing into a full-fledged business, and I was finally starting to see the fruits of my labor. My tech product was gaining traction, and I even quit my full-time job to focus on it full-time. I felt on top of the world. But on the personal side, everything felt like it was falling apart. It had been over a year since I'd last seen my family. I still kept up with some distant relatives on social media, but the direct connection was completely severed. I spent most of my days working on my business, but every now and then, that familiar pang of loneliness would hit me. I was building something amazing, but I couldn't share it with anyone who truly understood me. One day I got a call from my dad. I almost didn't pick up. It had been so long since we'd talked, and I wasn't sure I wanted to reopen that door. But something inside me pushed me to answer. "Hey, it's your dad," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "I've been thinking, maybe I've been too hard on you. Your mom and we've been talking, and we want to make things right. We've seen what you're doing, and I'll admit I didn't understand it at first, but maybe we were wrong." I was stunned. For a split second, I thought I had misheard him. My mind raced as I processed his words. This was the same man who had kicked me out all those years ago. This was the same guy who'd told me I'd never amount to anything because I wasn't following the right path. But now, he was acknowledging that maybe he had been wrong. It was almost too much to process. "I know we haven't been the best parents to you," he continued, "but we want to try again. We want to make up for lost time." I sat there in silence, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to tell him everything. How hurt I was by their rejection, how it shaped me into who I was today. But another part of me just wanted to let the past go and move forward. After all, wasn't that what I had been doing all these years? Moving forward without them? Part 10. The moment of decision. The conversation with my dad left me in a whirlwind of emotions. For the first time in years, I felt like there was a chance for reconciliation. They were acknowledging the success I'd built and admitting they'd made mistakes. It was everything I had secretly wanted to hear, but at the same time, it wasn't enough to undo everything that had happened. I spent the next few days reflecting on that phone call. I thought about how far I'd come, how much I'd achieved on my own, and how hard it had been to get to where I was. I had built my business from the ground up, survived on my own, and made something of myself without their support. I had earned my independence, and that wasn't something I was willing to just hand over. I also thought about what it would mean to let them back into my life. Could I forgive them for what they did? Could I ever trust them again after everything they put me through? In the end, I realized something important. Reconciliation wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about finding peace with it. I didn't have to erase the pain or pretend like it didn't hurt. But I could choose to move forward with a new perspective, one that allowed me to embrace my own success and my family's attempts to make amends, without letting it define who I was. So I called my dad back. "I appreciate what you're saying," I told him, "but I'm not the same person I was when I left. I've worked hard to build this life for myself, and I don't think I can just step back into the role you expected me to play." He didn't interrupt me. He listened. "I'm willing to try, but it's going to take time. I can't just forget what happened, but I'm open to building something new, not as your son trying to fit into your mold, but as an individual who has learned to stand on his own." There was a long pause, and then he said, "I understand. We'll take it one step at a time." And that was the beginning of a new chapter, not just for me, but for my relationship with my family. It wasn't an immediate fix, and it wasn't without its struggles, but it was real. And it was enough for me to move forward with the peace I'd been searching for. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much has changed. I went from being the kid who was rejected by his own family for being different to becoming someone who built a successful business, all while staying true to myself. The journey wasn't easy, and there were plenty of moments where I questioned everything, but I realized that my uniqueness was never a weakness. It was my greatest strength. The key takeaway from my story: you don't have to fit into anyone's mold to be successful. Your path might not be what others expect, and you might face challenges that feel impossible to overcome. But if you stay true to who you are and keep pushing forward, you can achieve things you never thought possible. To anyone out there feeling like they don't fit in or like they're not supported, know this: your dreams are valid. You are capable of greatness, and it's okay to forge your own path, even if it's not the one people around you are expecting. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like you were rejected for being different? How did you handle it? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. And if this video resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories and advice on overcoming challenges and achieving success. Thanks for watching, and remember, you've got this.